You're listening to the British Baseball Podcast. So welcome back to the show. I've got John Boyd from BS UK. I put out there the other day that I had a what if scenario. What if London had been included in the 2012 London Olympics? And to a lot of people who replied to me with different scenarios, and then Mr. Boyd messaged me and said I was involved in the bidding process for the games. Let's chat about it, and it really revved my engine to discuss it a bit further. So John, welcome back in.
Well, thanks for having me again, Matt. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Very well. Again, thank you for bringing this to light and for agreeing to talk me through the process. So I'll leave it open to you. How were you approached? How were the first initial involvements made?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it was a very interesting experience within my career, and and one that's left me, I think, fairly scarred, but with some, I think, positive hopefulness looking forward in terms of the place of baseball and softball in the Olympics in the future. Um, so I joined the National Olympic Committee in the early 2000s, taking over from James Pearce, who was preceded by Mike Harold on the National Olympic Committee for baseball. And at the time, both baseball and softball were seen as separate sports, so were offered a place each on the National Olympic Committee. And Mike Jennings was the delegate for softball, and very much a part of the early National Olympic Committee discussions was starting to consider whether or not London could put in a bid. We had just hosted, I think, a very successful Commonwealth Games in 2002 in Manchester,
Yep.
Which kind of gave people a sense that actually this country could do sport and could organise sport pretty well. But there was a whole fiasco giving back the World Athletics Championships. And kind of at that point, there was a lot of discussion about Britain being a bit of the laughing stock of worldwide sport, and some real concerns about whether or not we could deliver it and how people would view it. But in 2004, the National Olympic Committee decided to put in a bid for London and decided to back it. And that kicked off a process that was a very interesting one to go through. And as the National Olympic Committee member and as a member of staff of Baseball Softball UK, I was working directly at that point with the World Federation, then called International Baseball Federation, IBAF, on the bid proposals, brokering the discussions between IBAF and the bid team about what we needed and how things would work. And I think if we just look at baseball for a second, which I think is the majority of your listeners, baseball was we toyed with a number of different considerations as to how we would put baseball in its facilities, where we would go, all that sort of stuff. And we looked at Lord's cricket ground. The big concern there was, well, they were on board until they realised that we would cut into their wicket to put in an infield, and that's just not cricket, I'm afraid. So there's no way that they would have agreed to that in the end. And as soon as they realised the tech specs of that, they became the archery venue. And the solution that we came up with in the end was pop-up facilities at two major pop-up stadiums in the middle of Regent's Park that would have hosted initially the baseball and then moved on to softball. And those pop-up stadia would have been taken down, but they really captured our imagination in terms of baseball and softball would have been played within a 10-minute walk from the West End, from Media Central London. And at the time, in particular when we were going through the bid process up to 2005, Stratford wasn't yet the hub it is now. East London hadn't kind of become such a populous place and become a lot more, I think the Olympics caused the gravitation towards East London. So actually being that close to what we then thought of as real London, and I don't mean that to bag on anyone in East London, but was a real kind of benefit and incentive for the program. So those facilities would have been very interesting. We worked with them on the tech specs, technical specifications, and they also would have invested quite heavily in a lot of different facilities across the country, particularly those training facilities that were identified in Enfield, at Waltham Abbey, There was some discussion around Finsbury Park and whether or not that could be upgraded. There was there was a lot of there was discussion around Brighton at the time as well, and the use of that facility for training camps, because back then we were a fully integrated Olympic sport with 8 teams in the program. With eight teams coming through wanting to train, have training camps, there would have been a very big pull on those and a lot of investment that would have come with them. So we were gearing up for all of that. And then in late 2004, early 2005, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was the winter. The bid team hosted the assessment team from the IOC, and I remember quite vividly on a very wet and cold morning taking Sebco and some IOC dignitaries around Regent's Park, showing this empty grass field so that they and some of the designs for where the baseball and softball stadiums would go. And then kind of being, very interested in London, and us coming back and getting a bit of assessment from the British Olympic Association, the bid team that felt pretty favourable about our chances after that bid team had gone. And some of the things that I really liked was the elements of how we were tackling with high costs of the sports facilities, like the stadiums with pop-up stadiums, how we were thinking about leaving legacy facilities. And this isn't a particularly baseball legacy. I think a lot of the baseball legacy would have gone into Waltham Abbey and Enfield and the likes of Brighton. But actually, with the softball legacy, they were planning on leaving a footprint that could be interchangeably used for baseball or softball, but primarily would have been a fully skinned infield in Regent's Park with some grandstands and a backstop and some dugouts. And for us, that I don't know how many of your listeners know the kind of open air theatre in Regent's Park is quite famous for Shakespearean plays in the middle of summer. That's the feel that we would have had for our sport. Again, the 10-minute walk from Media Central, and again, Media Central is now closer to you than it is to me. But was certainly the heart of Media Land then, and still has a very vibrant kind of population close to Regent's Park here. So there was some really interesting things that were coming out of that, and we felt pretty confident going into 2005. We hosted the American Embassy. We had the press, and Channel 4 did some coverage, and a whole bunch of different people looking at our sport. And then it came to Wednesday, the 6th of July, 2005, a day that I remember very well. The office all went to a local bar on Charlotte Street and watched the bid process from the IOC, and watched the envelope being opened. And we were very aware at the point that the envelope was being opened that we were facing it with a positive decision to London. The upgrade in all of those facilities, the legacy facilities, and Baroness Campbell, who was the chief executive of UK Sport at the time, had committed to a minimum of £500,000 per sport per year in the 7-year run-up to the London 2012 Games to prepare for this. And we knew that as the host nation, we were dead set to be one of the teams. So we had all of that, and as soon as the envelope opened, that's what we had. London is going to host 2012. Everything's falling into place. We had a very big celebration, as you can imagine, and woke up the next morning with a very heavy head. And at the time, we gave our staff a bit of a lie-in, so none of us were rushing into the office. And I remember I had about a 30-minute bus ride into work, and I remember getting to the bus stop and kind of trying to work out what was going on. Because there was definitely a problem, and what had happened was the 7/7 bomb, the London bus bomb, and the underground bombings that had all hit us that day. So to wake up into that the morning after, the elation of London winning the games was an incredibly emotional time. Colleagues, Jenny Fromer, who I was working with at the time, felt the effects of the blast because she got off the underground at King's Cross and was walking past Woburn Place as the bus went up, and a lot of what was going on was crazy, and it felt very, very, very emotional, and quite a difficult day. And once that day had wrapped up and we're kind of getting to grips with everything, we went to bed, and the whole staff team went, kind of regroup a little bit. And I remember being woken up at 5 o'clock on the Friday morning with a call from Lausanne saying that baseball and softball had been removed from the Olympics as of London, and they would no longer be in the games, and we're just lost within that decision. All of the Olympic investment that would have gone into the infrastructure, all of the profile of being the home nation, and all of the investment from UK sport that would have gone into building elite performance programs, and that was devastating. So yeah, I mean, I think some of the background is very interesting. Every sport was up for exclusion or confirmation, if you like. And the IOC had decided under Jacques Rogge, the leader at the time, that every sport needed to secure a majority to remain an Olympic sport. This was a latter stage after he had tried to, he'd maneuvered a few times to try and remove three particular sports: baseball, softball, and modern pentathlon. And it was part of his drive to modernize the sports in the Olympic program, to cut costs, which have continued to be themes within the Olympics. But he also didn't particularly like the kind of baseball setup politically. His predecessor was very much pally with the IBAF former president. There was a kind of sense that this was that the inclusion of baseball in 1992 and then softball in 1996 was a little bit on the back of some of that friendship that had existed. And Jacques Rogge was a modernizer, or that's at least how he saw himself, and he wanted to kind of modernize the sport by removing those three. So he put every sport up for confirmation. And what we later found out, kind of transpired within that IOC session, was that there were 105 IOC delegates, and therefore to get a clear majority, you needed 53 votes in favor of the sport, and every other sport got a clear majority. And what happened with baseball was there were 54 against baseball being part of this, 50 for it, 50 in favor of it being a game, and one abstention. And in softball, the vote went 52-52 with one abstention. And what transpired really was that a lot of the IOC members, they're the highest kind of being an International Olympic Committee member is one of the highest statuses you can have in amateur sport, or now sport, not just amateur. And a lot of people have their sports that they come from, they have their connections, they have livelihoods that often come from the sports, either in performing or playing the sport, or broadcasting, or sometimes equipment supply. And the abstention was from a baseball and softball equipment supplier, a very well-known supplier, and in many ways he was doing the right thing. He was making sure that there wasn't a conflict of interest that was influencing positively the future of the sports. That we should hold up in kind of full as a good example of what the right thing to do is. But unfortunately, of course, you look at the single outlier, right? And you kind of wonder what if, and what if others had the same level of kind of integrity as he did. So very interesting, very kind of painful decision. And I think a lot of I'm preempting some of your questions as to why that happened. In the early 2000s, there was I think a big shift that I noticed politically that became a little bit anti-American. It was Gulf War time, and it was post 9/11, and there was this little sentiment of anti-Americana, I think, which manifested itself in a particular political point that was being made by the IOC, that they wanted the best athletes in its competition, and Major League Baseball wasn't really about to stop its season to allow the major leaguers to go and play in the Olympics, primarily because of the cost it would have been to the Major League Baseball as a business. And Major League Baseball is a business that it isn't of the power of the IOC, but it's a major international sporting business, and it's a big ask. And I think the other thing that kind of came through, I mean, that was the most fundamental issue in terms of not providing major league players. So it always felt like a second-tier competition, an amateur game. But there were other issues, and unfortunately, it also coincided with things like the congressional trials of Barry Bonds and others around the kind of doping side. And the doping in baseball seemed to be a problem. And again, those two things were used against baseball and politically by others who didn't want baseball in the program. I think there was a complete failure as well from the IOC to understand that softball was a different dynamic. Fundamentally, very similar sport on the field, but an all-female sport in the IOC's mind, a sport that did send its best athletes, had never had a positive doping test, and was, at the same time as the IOC was making commitments to increasing the number of female athletes, they removed about 360 female athletes in a heartbeat, thinking it was just basically the same as baseball.
Yeah.
So I think it was a very painful decision and a very difficult one for us to get past. But yeah, the 6th, 7th, and 8th of July 2005, 3 days I will never forget.
Yeah, that's what a ride that would have been. There's some really interesting things you mentioned there as well. I mean, what was the initial reaction from Seb Coe and the team when you took them around? Did they seem really in for it and really interested?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some of the we've been building for a number of years kind of good relations, I think, with the British Olympic Association, with UK Sport, and we were very much at that point we were 4 years into a decent funding kind of arrangement with Sport England as well. So we'd really kind of we'd got our feet under the table as sports, and this is at a time when Baseball Soccer UK was formed, as we talked about last time in 2000, as a joint venture between the two federations. But the first thing that we did was we actually just merged everything. We had one chart of accounts, one bank account, one infrastructure, one staff team, and we had the federations were effectively kind of two councils almost that contributed in from a baseball and a softball perspective. So we really were very much seamless as an organization. We were kind of finding our feet as a professional body, and being regarded as such as we were getting there. So we managed to build some good relations, I think, on behalf of baseball and softball together with each of those bodies. And I remember, we didn't get a lot of time with Seb Coe. He was a very busy man, as you can imagine, at that time. But he said all the right things in the right spaces, and was even afterwards was advocating as much as he could for us. And when we took back the question of, is there any way that the organizing committee can put pressure on the IOC to maintain our spot, and they were receptive to that. But obviously, we're a little blip on the whole organization of a London Games, and unfortunately, that didn't have a lot of traction. We didn't have a lot of purchase over the IOC on that one. Yeah. But equally, they were fighting our corner to make sure that we had what we needed to be that credible on the field program. And I'm absolutely convinced that everyone was pulling in the direction where we wouldn't have run up against any problems of qualifying, because when you're the host nation, the only thing that can stop you from playing in that Olympics is if you're really bad. There's a qualification criteria that you have to fall below to not be included as the home nation team, rather than in all the other kind of systems where you have to go through and win through. So we would have got everything we needed to be that. And I think London would have felt I don't think do you remember what it was like watching the beach volleyball in London on Hostels Parade, where it's this iconic, when it wouldn't have been quite that, but I think we would have stood out because we were in Regent's Park and we were on these pop-up venues, and we had that kind of vibrancy of this sport. And we would have pulled out the old, it started here in 1749 in Walton-on-Thames story, and we would have owned that. And I think there's so much that would have come from that would have been really positive, but alas, wasn't to be.
No, I suppose that brings us on to the otherwise. I mean, I don't want to answer this because I don't want to upset everybody that could be listening. Like, imagine for a minute then that baseball was included and softball was included in the Olympics. What would the outcomes have been? What do you think would have been? Where would baseball be today, and softball to that extent? What position do you think they could have been in?
So I think there was a definite. Let's take it in chunks. So from a participation and profile point of view, let's start there. Every Olympic sport had a spike in that. And I think that kind of spike and that kind of Olympic effect was very real and would have been very real for us. I think the street appeal that baseball brings, the understanding of the international significance of baseball, the playability of softball, the female aspect of softball, and now the female aspect of baseball. All of those would have been really appealing, and particularly appealed to demographics of people that were less sporty, if you like, or hadn't found, or maybe were athletic and were sporty but hadn't found the right sport yet. And I think that all would have picked up. A lot of sports found that burst of interest quite challenging to respond to in terms of coaching and infrastructure. As we talked about last time, I think the biggest growth limiter at the moment is human people around the players, the people who organize, the coaches, those sorts of things. So I think we would have still had that challenge. And I will come back to legacy in a second, because I think there's something that we benefited anyway from legacy. So profile and participation, I think, would have grown, and we would have seen increase much more rapidly and take up with a lot more interest. I think the main difference is what the profile of the sport, the raised profile of the sport in terms of its significance, its turnover, its investment from government would have brought in terms of interest. And what I've noticed in, kind of being a national sports body that is recognized as shoulder to shoulder with a lot of the other ones that you would recognize, from British fencing through to archery through to badminton, all the other NGBs, we have an appeal to people who are either really skilled and have an interest in sport, who aren't necessarily players of baseball or softball, but might have an interest in them. And we have an appeal to people who are completely independent of their kind of involvement in baseball and softball, purely as kind of people who want to volunteer into our organization, either at the national level on our boards, or on our committees, or in club structures, or helping with facilities, or all of that. And I think that kind of human resource, if you like, the voluntary human resource, the highly skilled people would have really increased, I think, significantly had we been a part of the Olympic Games. That 7-year run up to them, and then also the years afterwards, would have seen a good 15 years, I reckon, of kind of glowing extra appeal that we would have had even more than we are. So bluntly, we could have had a chair that was said go. I mean, maybe not quite said, but of that sort of standard. And people who would have seen an opportunity to help move the sports on. And I think that would have been very interesting. We would have had a very different workforce for the sport. We would have had a talent program that would have helped the likes of Liam Carroll, who's unfortunately stepped down this week, but would have had a much clearer path to the kind of top of their sport, and had not had to try and carve out their own kind of professional route, but that would have been put on a platter for them. Paid head coaches, paid coaching staff, paid sports and conditioning, paid mental strength and awareness, paid nutritionists. All of that stuff would have been in place. So I think a lot of that is what we missed out on, and the trickle down effect and investment into the junior national team programs, and it took us until we secured the talent money from Sport England to invest into the High Performance Academy, until we ever got any of that kind of same same kind of investment. And even that was a drop in the ocean compared to what is it? I think rowing gets 30 million pounds, the highest talent investment.
Wow.
So we wouldn't have got that level, but even if we got a kind of degree of that would have been quite substantial. But I do think that the sports have really benefited through the kind of collective legacy from the games. The investment that was made from 2005 onwards into sport, and the government's backing, meant that baseball and softball were one of the 46 sports together, one of the 46 sports that will continue to be funded by Sport England all the way through that period, providing input into us as a not-for-profit. It's all the things that we do: the coaching, the governance, the safeguarding, the financial management, the sports development, the setting up of facilities like Farnham Park. All of that is very much front and center on the wave of investment from government, from lottery into sport, on the back of that London 2012 legacy. So I think we've, it hasn't been all for naught, and it's not that we haven't got anything out of this at all. Yeah, pretty tough to compare what could have been when you look back actually.
Yeah, thank you for that. But now we've got baseball back in the Olympics. It's coming up in Tokyo next year. Is it next year? I
It
can't
is
remember
next
what they
year, yeah.
said they're doing it now. Yeah, next year, and it's going to be in Los Angeles, a little bit further down the road. Um, how are we preparing for that sort of avenue? Do you think that baseball will be around long enough for Britain to make an impact and get some more publicity?
So baseball and softball. First thing, now one sport very clearly in the Olympics. So
Right, yeah,
we let me talk a little bit about the journey between 2005 and getting back in for Tokyo. Long, painful journey, a lot of soul searching. Uh, Effectively, and I've got this from very good sources, people who are in the room for both meetings. The IOC, very much under Jacques Rogge's leadership, were meeting with baseball and saying, baseball, you're never going to get back into the Olympics unless you are one sport with softball. And then going into a meeting with softball and saying, softball, you're never going to get back into the Olympics unless you go alone. So very much the message that was coming through was simply reduced to baseball and softball. You're never going back into the Olympics. We can say what we like.
yeah,
I think the message started shifting under um, under the new regime under Thomas Bach, where he pulled out a 2020 agenda and he started talking about the modernization. And he started talking about how to appeal to younger generations, and he started seeing the street appeal of baseball. And there was a recognition of the female strength and high athleticism of softball. There was an understanding of that by that point, of the female athleticism that we also saw in that the replacement sport of rugby sevens that took one of our spots. And I think a lot of that kind of started playing back into it, and it really helped a lot. So by the time that we were starting to put together the kind of reinstatement bids around Tokyo, once Tokyo was looking like a favorite, we were able to kind of accentuate one sport, and the World Federation started integrating baseball and softball into itself. So the International Baseball Federation and International Softball Federations effectively merged into the World Baseball and Softball Confederation, and are continuing to do that now through the continents. And the Ricardo Facari, the current WBSC president, has, I think, went on record earlier this year saying it's time for the sport to integrate at all institutional levels, and the next one is certainly continent. So it's coming through for national governing bodies to be integrated as well, and for clubs to do the same. So I think a lot of that kind of that process of bringing the sports together really helped. I think Ricardo Facari has done a phenomenal job of kind of putting forward the best foot for the sport in the IOC's mind. I think that's not an easy task, and there are certainly some things that are not healed problems between the integration of the two sports. But fundamentally, the kind of way that Facari has turned around the International Federation to have some international properties that bring in revenues really helps. Feels like a credible world federation. And I think further than that, the kind of inclusion then in Tokyo, it was a no-brainer. Of course, Japan is going to put in baseball and softball. They are fantastic. I used the example earlier. Watch next year when baseball and softball are played in Tokyo. The atmosphere from the Japanese fans in those stadiums, in the Tokyo Dome, and in other places where the games are going to be played, will be phenomenal. The atmosphere will be electric. The atmosphere will feel like the volleyball at Horse Guards Parade, beach volleyball, and I think that's going to make us stand out. Unfortunately, we won't be in Paris. Paris has declined to add baseball and softball into its program, primarily over I think Costa Stadia. That seems to be the big one. There was a bit of an issue with profile in Japan, or in France. It wasn't quite as big as France would have liked. And we're expecting that we're a slam dunk for LA. The interesting thing was there was a moment where Disney was starting to try and connect LA and France, with Disneyland Paris being one of the potential venues for the Paris Paris Olympics,
Oh,
and
very
then
cool.
obviously LA. It makes sense for Disney to be involved in that, but that in and out nature is really different. Of what the IOC has evolved, the Olympics has evolved so that you can be in one Olympics, miss the next, move to the next. They've got different disciplines in some sports that come in and out, and it's part of this modernization agenda, but it's quite difficult to deal with as a sport because you're recruiting someone now and they don't know if they're going to go to the Olympic Games then or never, or it's very difficult. It isn't. It feels a little bit more like hit and miss, a little bit. My concerns are that if it starts making the Olympics a little bit more like Britain's Got Talent, or that kind of competition, a hit and miss time to time, rather than a real kind of pinnacle of quite integrated sports systems that produce opportunities for people to compete at that stage.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think we will be we certainly baseball and softball will be in Tokyo. Baseball didn't qualify. Neither did softball. Softball got to the final against Italy to qualify for Tokyo, and unfortunately lost 5-0. But they had a phenomenal run. Both teams, we managed to get some funding for Baseball Softball UK was a catalyst for both teams getting funding from UK Sport last year, and softball still in the running to get some money out of UK Sport for the next 4 years and in the run up to LA 2028. So our fingers are crossed looking forward. I think both programs have a shot. With baseball in the backing of Major League Baseball through the World Baseball Classic and all of the investment that Major League Baseball puts into that program always has a good shot. And I think the connection that we have to various different parts of the world that have largely been created and certainly advanced by Liam Carroll and a lot of his predecessors in the first class GB baseball coaching and administration staff. I think you've got to like the chances of us continuing to grow the program.
Yeah.
I think GB Women's Fast Pitch program has a really good chance of taking strides forward, and that will, that does depend, I think, on UK Sport investment and the program moving into another phase. But I mean, they've always shown that they've punched well above their weight, and yeah, you've got to like the chances of at least one of them qualifying for LA 2028.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. Guess we'll have to watch and see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. John, thank you very much for your time as usual. I really appreciate the insight. You've given us some really fascinating takeaways there too. Anything else you'd like to add before we go?
No, just keep us updated on your playing experiences. I don't know if your season's over, but it's been great to watch your ups and downs, and I've seen that you're getting some tips from the Twitter sphere as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
yeah.
going to post my notes on my new batting that I did with me and a colleague at Manchester Baseball. Took both our GoPros down there. I forgot my memory card. His battery ran out, and we couldn't get them both to combine. So we had two pieces of equipment there. We couldn't use either of them. So yeah, I was really happy
Wow.
with my new swing. But yeah, I'll try and get some more training videos there soon.
No, I do, and I played baseball again this week. My first baseball softball of the year was a pickup game that was organised at Farnham Park, and went out to have a few swings and don the catcher's gear again.
Yeah.
Which proves that muscle memory is like riding a bike in many ways. All the good habits I think were still there, and some of the really bad ones too. But I had fun getting out there with some of British baseball's greats. Paul Vernon was there, Earl Dix.
Yeah.
Earl's coming on your show, isn't he?
He is. We're recording on Tuesday or Wednesday. I think it's Wednesday next week.
Oh, you'll enjoy that.
Yeah.
If you can understand him, you'll enjoy that.
Yeah, I saw him down at Farnham a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, we're gonna have a good time.
Just reminded me he's really British. Paul Stewart came down just to say hi, and we also have Mike Animal, who's played for almost as many clubs as Dennis Grogan has in British baseball. So yeah, it was just great to see everyone, and lots of people out there. Some beginners, some people who've never played before, some people. Mark Mills, who played for Brighton in the NBL and faced him in many a Brighton national championship, a whole bunch of different people that were down there, men, women. It was just great. So pickup games, I think they're going to stick around, certainly at Farnham Park next year.
Awesome.
But I'd encourage you to think about doing them in other venues too.
Cool. All the stuff. John, all the best, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Matt. Take care of yourself.
All right.